welcome. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind introduction. So today I want to talk to you about some futures research that I've been doing for about the last 3 years. This is the culmination of attempting to tie a framework by David Ronfeld, who is a political scientist at Rand for about 30 years. He is since retired. I came at this basically because I got interested in how social values evolve over time and how value shifts happen. And then I came across Ronfeld's work and then realized that you could tie the two together. So what you're going to see is a little bit of that theory to set you up for what the actual topic is, which is +N futures, collaborative nexuses, knowledge communities, network localism, the social commons sector. And this will make the +N will make a lot more sense as we go through. I'm going to just let you read these slides for a moment, just so you can see. Okay. That was a very quick take, so I'll summarize it. Basically, what we've seen for about the past 50 years is the rise of what Ronfeld calls the +N form, which is the networked, he calls it the networked form. Ronfeld's theory, much like several emergent values theories, evolutionary values theories, things like everything from spiral dynamics, if you've ever heard that, to Andy Hines' worldview model, to even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all represent different ways of looking at how values emerge. And there's been a lot of talk about that, obviously, in psychology, sociology, anthropology, things like that over decades. But what very rarely has happened is talking about the emergence of social forms. Turns out they go together. And in fact, they go together quite well. If you normalize them, and I chose to normalize them using Ronfeld's notation, you get emergent patterns that build on each other. It's just like biological evolution, where you never really throw things away. It's just modifications on top of modifications. And you tend to see gradualness turn into a mode change, almost like a speciation event. So what we have currently is we're sitting on top of the last node, which is +N. So what are the +N attributes? Well, you've got values forms. You've got those, oh, am I going backwards? Yeah, I'm going backwards, sorry. Values forms. They are archetypal nodes. They co-evolve over time. In fact, the oldest known mode, which is the base mode, which Ronfeld calls the tribal form, I call the narrative values, go back as long as humanity goes back. Our central organizing capability is the stories that we tell. It's how we encode knowledge over time. And it's still there. We still do that. You can see it all over the place in everything from book clubs to football, football teams and football fandoms. If you happen to have a preferred team, whether it's real football or American football. So anyway, each evolved form requires the prior levels to function. They usually emerge, at least they appear to emerge, due to a combination of social complexity and failure to address problems, what we would today call wicked problems, things that the old system can't solve. They're built up from, it's not a true evolution in the sense of we're getting genetic variation of our values or our social forms. These are all founded in our normal social traits. If you've ever read Nicholas Chikalis in his book Blueprint, you can see the texture and the form of how these things could come about from just a basic set of traits that human beings have and when dealing with each other socially. They do shape individual and organizational responses. They're amplified, and this seems to be a key thing, something Ronfeld spends a fair amount of time doing in his work, talking about how they seem to be amplified by different types of technologies. For example, I mentioned tribes' stories are the core form, or the core communication medium, shared stories. In the basic human organization form, the kind of that circle of humans form, where you can get together, see people's faces, talk to them, address them, deal with them around a campfire, so to speak. On top of that, you get the institutional form. After we started farming, we started needing the ability to distribute information, whether it's accounting for crops and taxes, defending things, sending orders to different places. Then you start to get you start to get a need to communicate at a distance. So writing becomes more important, recording things on some way, beads, knots, pieces of paper, clay, whatever form we found. Each one seems to amplify according to that form. So when we started getting printing and then later electricity, we started to see another form emerge, and then most recently the internet and digital technologies. Each values form has a distinct worldview and a preferred governance form. It has an approach. It's rather like handedness. You've got two hands, but what changes is that I prefer one over the other. I really would prefer to grab something with my right hand. Well, if I have a dominant set of values based on a values form, then if I'm hierarchic, if I tend to be very truth, order, black and white, I want things a certain way, think there is truth and it is absolute, then I'm going to reach with that hand. In another way, if I'm more egalitarian and competitive, I might be reaching with another metaphorical hand. So these things go together. One is like the hardware on a computer, and the other one's like the software. The worldview is the software. The governance form is the hardware that it runs on, and they mutually reinforce each other. It's very difficult to run programs today on modern computers and vice versa, even though that you can see the evolution of them over time. That analogy holds for how societies are brought together and and formed. So this is the hardest thing to take, and this shows up in a lot of literature on worldviews, in particular value sets, is that they are neither good nor bad. They arose to address specific issues with societies at specific times. They seem to be resonant modes of how we adopt values. We keep seeing them over and over and over in different cultures. Fundamentalist Christians are have very similar attitudes and way of approaching things as fundamentalist Muslims, fundamentalist Buddhists, even fundamentalist atheists, if there is such a thing. The way their thinking patterns operate, the way they assume the world works, isn't necessarily based in culture. Culture is an amplification on that. It's the expression of that in a particular form. Going back to our computer analogy, it would be like an instance of software. I have Microsoft Word, but my instance on my particular machine running this particular way has a certain form. That's rather like culture. So, but they're neither good nor bad. They do, however, however can express healthy and unhealthy traits. So next, the emergence pattern. This is key, and it's probably one of the key things that Ronfeld created, and it's one of the things that I've adopted for values forms, which is that you get this base emergence with what he calls tribes. I call kinship circles. And then the next layer up, you get authoritarian hierarchies. Now you notice in the emergence form, you see plus I is really T plus I, because you never get away from that base form. Same thing for plus M. You get competitive exchanges, what we typically call markets, but you also see competitive exchanges in things like science. People are competing on papers, they're competing with theories, they're competing. Competition seems to be the key thing. You're trying to move up that ladder. Plus M tends to loosen up the very strict hierarchies and positional hierarchies of plus I. Plus N is the latest form that we've recognized. And there doesn't appear to be a cap on this, but this is new enough that it's hard to tell if there's other ones might come after. There's some speculation on that, but it sits on top of, obviously, everything below it. And it largely is collaborative connections. Going back to our tribal, our ancient era, our call it hunter-gatherer era, back, say, 10,000 years ago, before we had civilization, we see each of these kinds of patterns happen, but the amplification mechanism wasn't there to blow it out and instantiate it and create those as social forms. So again, normal human behaviors and tendencies, kind of the left-handed, right-handedness of things, we've always had those, but the combination with that and the social context seems to create these reinforcing structures of values, worldview values, archetypal worldviews, if you will, and social forms. So what my studies my futures research studies over the last few years have determined is this. Basically, the four forms show up, four values forms show up as a trust-based form that has a narrative-driven worldview and values of group unity and mutual support. That's obvious. In a harsh world, it's very difficult to survive. This is true today. This is what you see in a healthy family: mutual support and healthy communities. So it's face-to-face trust. It's, I know these people, I know their history, I have some sort of relationship with them somehow, whether it's genetic or otherwise. And so it's tribes, families, forms with narrative worldviews. Plus I is, of course, institutions or tiers with an authoritarian worldview. I don't mean that in the popular sense. I mean it in the sense of it's top-down, that it's hierarchical, and authority proceeds from a top through very rigid channels. Now remember, it's also, plus I also incorporates T, so at each of those levels you tend to see tribal interactions going on. So you get a little bit of that looseness. Think of, trying to think of a good example, a drug cartel would be a very good example. You might have very, very rigid structure of this guy's on top, you know, a chieftain type guy on top, and he's got his lieutenants, and those people have their lieutenants, and it goes all the way down. The chieftain form itself is actually a transitional form between tribes and plus I, but again, all of this is a continuum. These are just sort of nodal things that we got, kind of like I said before, speciation of a type. So the next one is plus M, competitive exchanges form. And it's really interesting because this is what we typically think of as modernist or materialist, if you will. It values objective measures, achievement, status. This would be our markets form with a modernist materialist worldview. That's been around for a very, very long time. And then the plus N form, which we want to focus on today, is our collaborative egalitarian form, which is, it's not quite at the same level of trust base of I know you trust. This is more like the situation of I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, and I've got a trust change. I've got a provenance change. And then once I start interacting with them, maybe I do start having more base T type trust with them, but we've at least got mechanisms in place because it's also built on those other forms. You can see technologically why that works. In our current age with the internet, it literally facilitates those sorts of things. It's easy to skip levels. It's easy to maintain contacts with people that you don't have immediate proximity to, and in fact, be very close to them. A couple of my best friends, one lives locally, another one lives 600 miles away. I talk with them every day via texts. So this tends to form what Ronfeld calls networks. I call a nexus because there's a very specific form that seems to be very stable in social organization. We'll talk about that. And it tends to have a communitarian or post-materialist worldview. What we mean by that is it doesn't seem to, it's like the what do I do next? I've got all the power in the world. I've got all my needs satisfied, but I'm still not happy. So it's the one that looks for meaning. So if we want to focus on what's new, and we do because we want to look at the future, and we know that plus N is still forming. It's the newest one that's emerged over the last 50 years, and it seems to be rapidly accelerating, particularly in light of the pandemic. We're seeing more and more of it happen. So what does this newly emergent plus N form look like? What's been emerging from it? Because there's not just one thing, one pattern of behaviors or values that are emerging with it. And what futures do we think that's accelerating? And I'm going to frame those futures very specifically, not in terms of outcomes, but in terms of structures, in terms of value form structures. What are those specific things those emergent forms that we think are going to start taking over more and more aspects of governance and organization in our society, knowing that we're still going to have tribal family-like relationships, we're still going to have very authoritarian institutions that deal with property and force and people's place in society, or at least place in governance. We have rules, we have laws, we have corporate whatever, and then exchanges. We're going to have markets, we're going to have exchanges of different kinds where people trade for things of value or concepts of value, but where they're trying to get something out of the deal, trying to move their status up, trying to achieve something. So, but what does this collaborative future bring, and why is the pandemic accelerating it? Well, plus N organizations. The first is collaborative nexuses. Now, collaborative nexuses are really the base form. This is the key thing. Now, again, Ron Feld calls them networks. When I did a deep dive and looked at it from a values point of view, I said, what's the key thing here? Well, the key thing is not just networks. Social scientists describe all forms as networks. You can describe a hierarchy as a network. What a collaborative nexus is specifically it has attributes that allow people with affinities to collaborate with each other. And the affinities that can be affinities of goal, affinities of temperament, affinities of interest, all those. Now, the attributes of a collaborative nexus, it does tend to operate as a base information repository or knowledge repository for plus N collaboration. Sometimes that's in people's heads. That was a hardware failure with my microphone. So we'll get that out of the way. All right, so I'll go back. Collaborative nexuses have a number of traits, attributes. They act as an information repository, online, interactive, and it's usually some mix of both the people and digital information via a digital channel. Now that could be something as diverse as Wikipedia, or a chat room, or a Facebook group, something, or even your Twitter timeline can function as a nexus, as an information nexus, because people can go back, roll it back, forward, look at it. It could be a database. It could be all kinds of things. It's basically a very clumpy form of, we have information that's getting updated, changed, revised, shared, things like that. It's treated as a commons, and I mean as in Elinor Ostrom type commons, where the ones that are stable do tend to operate according to those rules, with the single exception of you're not trying to manage a limited resource. You're actually trying to take down an unlimited resource and filter it down to something useful. The unlimited resources, of course, the exploding amounts of information, are the rarity is trying to get enough attention on a piece of information to turn it into useful knowledge. And that's what a nexus does. A nexus is a mechanism for helping a group collaboratively manage that, whether a science fiction fandom or a community group trying to improve the park systems. They allow open participation, they allow open collaboration, active synthesis, various forms of passive active collaboration. I can go download open source software if I want. But more than anything, the direct value is amplified by contributions. So if you have the more people collaborating, the more people doing the work, it's many hands make light work. The more potential value is added for each individual, and values, and people can take off of a Nexus as much value as they want. Some people never put anything into it. They just take from it, and that's fine because it's an infinite well source of information and knowledge. But there are people that add to it so that it adds to something that they care about, some other non-material value. And maybe it's a non-material value that's promoting material value for themselves or others in some ways, like Google. Google offers lots of potentially free information, and they make money on it by selling ads. It's a hybrid form of Nexus, but that's the basic idea. Plus N communities, knowledge communities. There's lots have been written on knowledge communities. The take here is more think Nexus. What is a knowledge community really about? It's maybe not quite as robust as a commons. This is more like people, more of the tribal mode mixing with the plus N mode, saying, hey, I'm interested in something, this is useful to me, I want to coordinate something, and so they'll set up a knowledge community. And these things tend to be ad hoc. They are based, again, based on affinities of interest and need. They turn information into shared knowledge. They're again open. They tend to follow consensus rules. They do tend to track changes. Because everything's digital, it becomes very, very easy to go back and see the history of things. The old adage about nothing ever really goes away on the internet. They leverage knowledge from other communities. How much have we seen during the pandemic of one group saying, oh, I've got this medical knowledge, we have a need, let's go see if we can go do this thing with that, whether it's creating ad hoc masks that people can sew in their own homes, or 3D printing parts or replacement parts for respirators, whatever. So you get these knowledge communities that just sort of arise. They don't quite rise to the full form of a Nexus, but they're Nexus-like. And then they create, again, the common theme of they create value through collaboration. Networked localism. This is basically the idea where its attributes are such that this is driven largely as the plus N response to issues with governance. When society gets complicated enough, each, at least according to theory, each form arises. Well, our current complexity is based on our tribal relationships, plus our institutional relationships, plus our market relationships, and all of those things put together seem to be creating problems that we can't solve. Global warming, social dysfunction, inequalities of various sorts. All of these wicked problems that we seem to can't get our hands around, can barely manage in some cases. Ecosystem collapse, things of that nature, where to go fix the problem, you'd have to go eliminate it, roll yourselves back. Well, we don't roll back. If we roll back, that's a dark age. The only way to emerge out of it is to add a new layer. And so that's what networked localism is, part of that plus N layer, because it abridges some of the problems. It cuts across internal organizational boundaries. Plus M exchanges, they tend to, okay, we're gonna loosen the rules, we're gonna cheat a little bit, we're gonna pull ourselves up. This actually, but it does it competitively. So somebody wins, somebody loses. This says, no, we're going to work between things. I'm gonna cut across levels. I'm gonna go, if you've ever heard in a business, a skip level meeting. That sort of thing where we're connecting different parts that aren't normally connected. And they're doing it across all those domains. Network localism in itself does tend to be located in a place. It's not a no place like say exchanges tend to be, like the scientific attitude or the market attitude that says, no, the whole world is a thing. We don't come from any source. It actually has a place. And so, but we can network with it, so we can link to local resources. And by resources, I mean not only just physical resources, but informational resources, activity resources, people's interests, things like that. It tends to route around political boundaries and obstructions. You see this right now a lot with different states. Like I'm from the United States, I live in Texas, and you see different states like California almost almost, but not quite, declaring independence, saying the federal government's doing things that I don't like, we're going to go off on our own. And then we're going to go create these compacts and coordination things with different states, and we're going to negotiate for things. That is a form of networked localism. That's at the state level. This pushes all the way down to the community level, and even within communities. You can see that through, if you've ever read the book New Localism, lots of good examples there. Chattanooga, Tennessee basically formed a network localism where they revamped their city, connected with others, got new ideas, started sharing that information. Same thing with Pittsburgh. They went from a dead steel town to a thriving robotics and entertainment center. So you see those kinds of things arising because we can connect and we can skip levels and we can penetrate barriers and we can route around blockages. The coordination with network localism, like everything else in the plus N, is collaboration, and it links and shares with other communities. And this is the part that we're seeing more and more now after the pandemic. People are going, hey, we're out of this resource. Do you have any? Can you share? Do you have capacity for that? See this in particular with ventilators. We're seeing lots and lots of communities going, okay, we've got an excess, we're past our peak, we're going to go ship resources to somebody that needs them. So, plus N organizations, networked localism. Oh, sorry, that was an extra slide that didn't get deleted. Knowledge communities. Knowledge communities. Wait, I'm going backwards. That's what's happening. Sorry about that. Networked localism. Plus N sector. Rounding this out, if you look at the world through the sector eyes, you know, public sector, private sector, there's one that usually gets left out. Ron Feld points this out in some of his blog posts and in his original paper, that the public sector and the private sector seem to have dominated the 20th century. What they seem to have crowded out was the civic sector, and that's the tribal, the T, what I call the T, that sector, that circle, that tight kinship type circle. But plus N gets its own sector too, and we see this again. If you wrap up the other things, you start seeing the emergence of an overall pattern of things where people think similarly, they act similarly, they're using similar mechanisms, similar tools to organize, and so they're taking on larger and larger problems. For example, the climate crisis. We're seeing more and more people just go out and say, I'm going to do something about it. And then they're connecting with other groups. And the mass connection of that, the connection of connections, the nexus of nexuses, if you will, is forming right now, and we can call it the social common sector. The social common sector, it arises because, or it's there to handle the problems that other things can't. And that seems to be like the conscience layer. If you do an analogy with the way our minds work, or our bodies, let's do our bodies, you could say the bones are our plus T, and the muscles are I don't know, our cells are the tribes that we're trying to organize, and the I is our bones, and the M are our muscles. They're the ones that move us around, even though they're restricted by our bones. Well, the plus N seems to be our nervous system. It's the one that actively responds to things, and it's asynchronous was the word I was looking for. It's asynchronous. It doesn't seem to operate all the time, but it does. What it does do is responds very quickly to things that it sees happening. It's like it's constantly monitoring. So there's always a low level of activity, but it seems to address all the problems that are rolled up with the civic, public, and private sectors cannot, those wicked problems again. It focuses attention on restoring the civic sector to health. This is a pattern that I've noticed, that because the civic sector has been weakened, particularly by the plus M sector so much, families basically split across geographic areas because of economic need or economic opportunity. Regions losing some of their regional identity, collapse of plus I institutions like churches and religious institutions, or even public institutions, lack of faith in public institutions, whether it's governments or other organizations that were once considered pillars supporting the communities. Those things have all weakened the civic sector and made it much more difficult because they're dependent on the other sectors, individuals in that they've lost that ability to connect, or at least it's up against a headwind. So the social commons sector, of course, collaborates to address those issues, but it also collaborates to create opportunities. You see this in a lot of different ways. I see this a lot in open science and open technology type things, where people do it for the fun of it, or they're doing it to meet a need, whether it's to create an AI that gives an autistic person a prosthetic social sense, and then releases that free and says, here, go for it. Here's your Raspberry Pi 3, put this on there, put a camera on it and a screen, and now this thing is going to read people's facial expressions and tell them exactly how someone else feels, for somebody that their neural wiring is atypical and they can't quite get it. You see that kind of response everywhere, and it doesn't have to be high tech. You see it with it creating all kinds of opportunities for people for social entrepreneurship, which is a new plus N term, where you see them going, okay, I need to have that plus M money. I need to have those plus M resources. I need to connect with plus I institutions to service plus T tribes, those families, civic sector. How do I do it? Well, I'm going to get it there by mixing my plus N values, my meaning. What am I trying to get out of this, to create a new opportunity that blends those things together, that satisfies them so that they're not out of balance anymore. Again, the social commons sector tends to respond and organizes via consensus. We see this quite violently with hashtag culture, or I would say violently, energetically with hashtag culture, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, any number of different things. And that's just one form of it. More benign forms are people literally just sharing culture via common memes, things like that. And not just normal, I mean, in terms of it actually spurs them to action. So the negative, remember, we have the negative side of that. This is where we also see fake news and things of that nature pop up, where you've got the negative side of the social commons sector is you have bad actors that can abuse the social commons sector's communications means. So again, there's not good and bad, but there is healthy and unhealthy. So, and it uses social media as its megaphone for organizing. This seems to be the clear signal now. I'm not sure that's going to always be the case. We have some technologies coming online that might change that, particularly with AI, interpreting people's emotions, being able to translate fluidly between people's, and even potentially, decades from now, deep neural connections, the ability to translate without speaking, translate language without speaking, just kind of the technological telepathy. Those could reshape that, but for now it looks like social media is its primary megaphone for getting the word out, because it allows you to get it out fast and to as many people. And since everything on Plus N is sharing and collaboration, social media is the sharing collaboration means. All right. So that's pretty much an overview of Plus N Futures. So what we see is the pandemic is accelerating all those, because it seems to be exposing the problems and the flaws that Plus M and Plus I have. And it's put us all into a Plus T mode. It's put us in that mode of having to worry about our personal safety. And do we have enough supplies? And can I have contact? It's actually put T into crisis because it can't form circles anymore. It can't get together. So Plus N allows us to do that, which is why you see this very sympathetic thing. There was a great thing I saw online where it was discussing, it was a social media post, where they were going, every dystopic story told in the last 30, 40 years has shown that when a big disruption like this happens, society breaks down, anarchy happens, things get violent, tribes of brigands take over, life is heck, it's all horrible. And No, what happens when this happens is we go online. Hey, let me show you my art. Let me sing you a song. Let's get together and tell jokes. Uh, the plus N, the great thing about it is it gives us another mechanism for sharing and creating and establishing connections with each other. And because there are connections of affinity, it makes us feel like we're part of a larger community than we normally would be. Instead of a face-to-face or a local kinship situation, now we can have affinity with people that are even unlike ourselves, but we share some aspect that are similar. So I can share a joke with someone in Dubai and they'll think it's very funny. I might not even know that they're in Dubai. They're just somebody that I happen to make friends with through a friend. So plus N futures, collaborative nexuses, we're seeing them form more and more and more. If you've played with any of the social collaboration tools, whether it's any of the number of tools, I'm just blanking on them. Slack, used today, several of them via Zoom for shared document type forms. Trello, any number of these software tools, these clearly plus N automation tools, people linking them together are actually able to create this shared knowledge that they can operate and do things, whether it's to go make money or go shore up people's safety or go help find them protective equipment, any of those things. And they're all happening. Protective equipment's a really good example because we've seen more than once, or not, I want to say more than once, we've seen just huge amounts of like the maker and DIY communities forming knowledge communities and collaborative nexuses to create this stuff. Well, one out of MIT designed a ventilator that they created a collaborative nexus with engineers, with medical professionals, and they designed something that could use very easily obtainable parts, including what is called an ambu bag, which every hospital has lots of those, and then use it for light ventilation so that they could free up ventilators for the people that are more critical. And it can be built for by a knowledgeable technician for $500, and it's currently been submitted to the FDA for approval because it requires certain things, and it requires a trained technician, just like a normal ventilator would. But they're using DIY and maker resources and techniques and plus and thinking to get there. Knowledge communities, see them popping up all over, everything from how to do gardening to how to grow things in your own garden, how to set up a solar panel, how to cook a tasty stew, how to do all kinds of things, how to clean your house properly and sterilize it. Networked localism, we see it obviously now because this got amplified by the pandemic, because cities are finding that their connections with their hierarchical structures of counties, states, or provinces, and the larger world community are much more fragile than they thought, because a lot of that fragility was because of over-reliance on supply chains and materials from different parts of the world, but also just because of differing worldviews. People in some countries, their governance responded wholeheartedly, and others, like the United States, we have different states in conflict and a federal government in conflict with other states. So what that means is that there's networked localism, at least definitely in the United States. I'm not quite sure about in other parts of the world, but because of that fragmentation, people are taking it more upon themselves to say, I have to protect myself, I have to find my own resources, I have to collaborate, and I'm not willing to put up with any hierarchical blockages. I'm not willing to put up any objections by markets or exchanges that they're losing money. I'm just going to go do it because this needs to be done. So it is an emergency type situation, but I think what it's doing is it's creating the network resources and also the thinking resources to say, hey, we don't have to wait on anybody. And so that networked localism makes people feel like if I collaborate with the people locally and then can connect remotely and share not only information, but potentially resources, we can just move forward. And then that, of course, creates a social commons sector. You build up collaborative nexuses, knowledge communities, and networked localism, you get an entire sector. And that sector rebalances and helps make healthy a system that has become unhealthy. At least that's the hope. And that appears to be what it's trying to do, whether it's collaborating, whether it's creating applications for local communities to go deliver excess food from restaurants to homeless, or create any number of different things like community compost heaps, or sustainable or pushes for sustainable changes to building codes, or even just how to get along with your family better when you're sick of being in the same house with them. All of those things amount to a social common sector that is pushing us into a new era. If modernism was the 20th century, then modernism and the public sector was the 20th century, then the plus N and values of collaboration and commons and social common sector is the 21st century. So I think that's it. I'm Tim Morgan. I have a MS in Strategic Foresight from University of Houston. I am the founder and Futures. I'm the founder of the North Texas Foresight Institute. I was very, very fortunate to become a 2019 APF Emerging Fellow, and you can reach me at my email address at tmorgan@ntxforesight.com. And I will stop the share and take some questions. So let's go to the Q&A. All right. I think this is just read from the open questions. There's a concept of negative peace. Oh, answer live. I'm not quite sure how this is supposed to work. So there's a concept of negative peace. This is Margaret Coetz, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Concept of negative peace, the absence of fear or violence that usually comes after a time of conflict. Opposite this is positive peace, the presence of attitudes, institutions. In your opinion, how do you think that we can create the conditions needed for positive peace despite the pandemic? Well, obviously, I'm going to say collaboration. So collaboration on mutual goals. Goals like security, fulfillment, and meaning, purpose and meaning. What we do is we have to recognize that all of those layers, all of the different values forms layers need to be satisfied. I as a plus N person, if I could speak from that perspective, I might not like market people very much. I don't like competition. I don't like conflict. I don't want to move up a ladder. I want to collaborate. That doesn't mean that isn't a healthy mode. It just means I'm not good at it. It's not my preferred mode. It's not the hand I want to use. So that's the thing. A lot of it is just recognition. And then recognizing that everybody has a different type of meaning that we get out of this. So let's skip. How can we build more robust immune system functions for these with bad actors you mentioned? That's a really good question. I think that's always been with us. I think there's been bad actors as long as there have been people. I've got some black sheep in my family, so does my wife, and they cause trouble every once in a while, and we have to be vigilant. Part of the complicatedness that seems to be added to society is addressing those bad actors. We get more and more laws in institutions. We get more and more attempts to break away, to do things in exchanges. We're trying to get away from, oh, that's a bad market. Let's go establish a new one that's more fair or more egalitarian. Same thing with the Nexuses. We just have to be vigilant. It's part of human nature. We're always going to have those bad actors. Do social common sector distribute power, and how could we and should we amplify this? How are politicians reacting? I don't think politicians really see it yet. Some of the ones in the United States that I think are still caught in plus M thinking. I think they're starting, they they talk about plus n goals, or they talk about goals that satisfy the gaps that plus m seems to have created, but they don't seem to have adopted plus n methods. They're just barely starting to get that. How can we amplify it? You know, here's the thing. They're going to catch up when they realize what's happening. So the way we amplify it is by ignoring them and routing around them. The old internet adage is that blanking on it, that the internet treats censorship, that's what it was, treats censorship as a network issue and routes around it. That's true of any kind of blockage with plus n. If a state is saying no, if a company is saying no, you route around them, and then you use social pressure to try and change them. Those are the two superpowers of plus n. We route around, and then we gather forces to try and force them to change. Same way plus m made plus I change. United States fought a civil war over that. If you look at the United States Civil War through this theory, it's clearly plus m plus a northern plus m culture trying to in conflict with a southern plus I, and boom, they had to come to a balance, and they established a kind of an ugly balance, but it worked, and they were able to proceed into the next century. So what might be ways? Oh, grassroots movements. Let's go skip to the bottom, since let's see, was the Occupy movement at an instance of plus n that maybe failed to incorporate plus n? Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what Occupy was. And I hadn't even thought of that until you mentioned that, but yes, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what it was. It was a very early signal for that type of change. And it was in the early days of what we consider the early days of the current internet and web. So, all right. I'm going to slip this one in because it's good. Do you have any views on the futures of nation states? Will people still identify as American? I think they're going to do and. Same way Americans tend to identify as I'm an Irish American, I'm a this American, I'm a that. I think the world is going to become a little bit more physical and virtual. I think some people will take it to extreme, but the last century was about ors. This century, I think, is about ands. Thank you all very much. I wish I could have seen you. So, y'all take care, and please stay safe. And as I am a longtime science fiction fan, and I'll mention this real quickly. Go on Eventbrite. I'm running a Science Fiction is Foresight conference next Saturday, all day. And so as a science fiction fan, I have to go live long, prosper, and wash your hands. So.